Another day, another 2024 article. This one's from The Hill. It's called Who Benefits If DeSantis Peaks Too Early? When running for president, there is always one anxiety creating fear for the perceived frontrunner prematurely peaking. For many Republicans, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has moved comfortably into the perceived frontrunner role with regard to the 2024 presidential election. Although DeSantis has not committed to running for president and likely won't for several more months, should he be so inclined, it is clear that his star has ascended as Donald Trump's continues to dim in the eyes of many in the GOP. But as the cliche reminds us, heavy is the head that wears the crown. While the Florida governor has gotten used to being the prized duck in the shooting gallery for Democrats and liberal media, he is now starting to draw fire from some in his own party, including potential Republican nominee opponents, such as South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem and New Hampshire Governor Chris Sununu. With regard to Noam, Sununu, or any other potential Republican candidate who may go after DeSantis, their audience is not the voters. It is the uber wealthy power brokers behind the scenes who write the checks to fund political action committees. As one who has been involved in a few winning presidential campaigns, it's easy for me to imagine staffers warning over potential Republican candidates. We need to go after DeSantis now. If not, he will lock in as the guy and vacuum up every major political donation to be had. You can bet those conversations are taking place. It's also logical to believe that in private, some staffers, if they are smart and truly care about their candidate, are warning DeSantis, be humble, don't start to believe your own press, be accessible, be nice to donors, reach out to communities less inclined to vote Republican, and don't come off as aloof or suddenly entitled. In the words of 1970s band Three Dog Night, one is the loneliest number. In politics, a frontrunner peaking too early is the next loneliest. As an example, ask former Vermont Governor Howard Dean. In 2004, Dean seemed to be on a solid glide path to the Democratic nomination, and then his I have a scream moment happened during a speech to supporters that January, after losing the Iowa caucus. Dean tried to pump up the room by listing all the primaries remaining. He closed that list with an exuberant scream, as CNN dubbed it, the scream that doomed Howard Dean. In the universe of presidential campaigns, it seems like a goofy blip at first, but when you are the perceived frontrunner, goofy blips, fake pass, and even slights to donors can be unintentionally or intentionally used to bring down your campaign. Dean's scream was literally played hundreds of times on New Hampshire and Massachusetts television stations before the New Hampshire primary. Goodbye, Howard Dean. Hello, Democratic nominee John Kerry. So if DeSantis peaks too soon, or his lead is continually whittled down by opponents seeking to stop his momentum, who might be the main beneficiary of such a downfall? The name I hear over and over again is Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin. I swear I've heard of him maybe twice. Some say that two of Youngkin's pluses are that he's the anti-Trump and that he's come across more a dignified and civil statesman, and that he is independently wealthy, so isn't likely to be beholden to special interests or those in power in D.C. As an example of Youngkin's adult-in-the-room manner, in November he was subjected to a somewhat bizarre, perhaps even racist broadside from Trump, who said on Truth Social, Youngkin, now that's an interesting take, sounds Chinese, doesn't it? In Virginia couldn't have won without me. When asked to respond to Trump's comment, Youngkin took the high road and ignored the bait. I do not roll that way. He said, I do not call people names, I treat people well, and I believe that that's the way that everyone should behave. And sometimes in politics, I think folks forget that. My note to Glenn Youngkin is this: more and more voters and Republican movers and shakers are starting to remember that civility and decency in politics are winning attributes. Whether or not Ron DeSantis stumbles, your star is rising over the horizon and getting brighter with each passing week. So this article is I picked it because it's interesting to have media that acknowledges a front runner who's not the former president that everyone knows, but that also says about this person, hey, be mindful that you don't make the same errors that these other early front runners made. Now, I'm gonna say this, and I'm gonna say it definitively. I don't care who gets mad, I don't care who calls me dumb in the comment section. Kristi Noem is not going to be the Republican nominee in 2024. Neither is Sunu, whatever the other guy's name is. She's not going to be the nominee. Mainly because, look, I'm just going to say it. GOP voters, I believe this. I don't think by next year, and I would love to be wrong about this with a less crazier candidate, um, which is hard to say because even with Haley, she's also saying, like, she's pretty much got all of the same positions as Trump, minus the insurrection. But I don't see Republican voters nominating a woman. Maybe they can win in several because you have representatives, governors, whatever. But like the actual nominee of their party for president, I just can't see it in the near future. Maybe in like the 2040s or 50s, but I just don't see it. Um, Ignoring that, DeSantis has the advantage of being from Florida, which is a much bigger state than South Dakota, which, by virtue of its size, like California, my state, like Texas, more people are going to pay attention to the politicians that have high offices there, the senators and governors. So that's already an advantage he has over her. There was a part of this article that was really comedic, and it's toward the end. So, like I said, Youngkin is a guy I've heard of maybe twice from different articles. Like he's not important. He's not a significant figure. He's a little known politician who, as far as I can tell, is when they mentioned in this article, he's not known for championing a position or having some kind of like dynamic specific thing that he does. They're talking about how Trump was calling him some kind of offensive name by calling him Young Kim. It's stupid, right? And it's like, well, you're praising Youngkin and saying that he responded to it. He responded by ignoring it and not taking the bait, being civilized, etc. But how does that make him any different from someone like John Kasich, for example, who infamously only won one state when he ran for president in 2016? So that I guess what this article is kind of irritating me about is it tries to pretend that whereas you have early front runners, you also don't have. I guess it's trying to paint DeSantis as, or at least it's trying to imply that DeSantis, if he doesn't follow a certain pattern of behavior or series of steps, could end up falling out fast like Howard Dean, right? But the problem I have with this article is it also tries to imply or doesn't outright mention that there are people who have done this whole decency and civility angle and have gotten creamed. I mean, look at Huntsman when he ran in 2012 against Romney. He gave speeches, we're not going to insult anybody and we're not going to be nasty and we're going to listen, and went nowhere. Need I remind people about Kasich? Really, Jeb Bush did the same thing pretty much until he started like noticing that he wasn't picking up any states, and right before he got out during South Carolina. But my point is, I think there's logic to the belief that DeSantis could get taken out by virtue of being attacked by members of his own party and also Democrats at the same time. But the article, it's interesting how it mentions that the attacks by him from members of his own party are not based around trying to appeal to voters, but to donors, right? And I'm like, oh my God, they're going to start talking about the U.S. oligarchy and how money has undue influence in American elections. I was getting really excited. But then they mention Youngkin and they start talking about how he's rich, so he won't be beholden to donors. It's like, but Trump is wealthy, right? Wealthiest president ever. And his positions are still in line with things that Republican politicians who get donations from big donors do. I mean, what do we say when every time there's a mass shooting and then Republicans like vote down every gun law, right? Oh, they're getting money from the NRA. Okay, well, Trump votes down pretty much or doesn't support really any measures of gun control. Um, People oftentimes will say that groups like, I'm not even going to get into that. I'll just give another example. Look at Saudi Arabia. And look at just foreign relations. When the U.S. gives its weapons or sells weapons to these foreign countries that are not democratic, what do we say? Places like Lockheed Martin, Boeing, these different defense contractors get these Republican politicians and a lot of Democrats too. I'm not a partisan hack, to go along with military conflicts because they can sell their weapons and make money, which they can in turn give to these politicians. Well, again, Trump continued every single one of the 7 wars that Obama had. So, again, the article, it has these little points where I get kind of excited, like, it's going to get into something interesting, but it just fumbles too much. Um, and the only thing I really can take from it is, yeah, DeSantis could flame out earlier or whatever, but at this point, when he's not even in the race yet, and a lot of the other people don't really seem to have any, it's like this. Most of the other candidates have positions that are fairly similar to both DeSantis and Trump, but most of the other candidates are also still not entirely open to just condemning Trump or like running against him or being very what's a good way of putting it? They're not as open to showing some hostility toward. Really, the only deviation is probably Pence. But DeSantis has Pence beat for two reasons. One, Pence is out of office and has been for 2 years, so it's like you're not even doing anything. DeSantis is still in office, so he looks more like he's actually a contemporary figure. And DeSantis can criticize Trump and be pretty much unscathed as far as like not taking the blame for it, because he's just like he's a governor. Meanwhile, Pence has to pretty much just, he's like, I don't support the insurrection, but I support every single other thing we did. So, it's interesting that the more this goes on, the more I'm really understanding. I think it's really becoming apparent why DeSantis is so appealing at this point. And I don't see him going out early if you don't get someone who has the same type of appeals. Like maybe Abbott, if he was running, could probably be like a good contender, but unless it's someone from like a really big state with a specific thing they're known for that is going to be open about, not worshiping Trump and trying to not upset his voters or people that they think support him, he's not going to flame out, at least no time soon. So it was an interesting article.